Hi there, my name is Catherine and I'm here to show you how to add and organize items in a reading list for use in your D2L course. You'll be using the library's new reading list tool where we may have already created a reading list for you, or you have created your own reading list. So in order to go to the dashboard for reading list tool, we're going to click on Course Tools from my D2L homepage for the course. I'm going to select Reading List, and it's going to either ask me to log in if I'm not already logged in, or it's going to bounce me into my reading list dashboard. Now in the dashboard, I can see all of the reading lists, so ones that I've created, ones the library has created for me, ones that I have used that the library's created and I've built off of. And we're going to select this one for this particular course. And I can see that the library has added one resource to my reading list. So if I want to manage my resources or add additional sections and resources or build on this list, I'm going to show you how using the Add button. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add sections. I like to organize my information for my students by section, by week. And so I'm going to say week 1, and I'm going to select the time frame for week 1 in the little calendar. First full week of classes. Now I can choose to make that display only for this time period, or I can choose to have it display at all times, which I prefer to do in case my students want to go back to something they've read earlier in the semester and use it again. So I'm going to say that I want it first in the list. I can add a description if I want. I'm going to say add. And I'm going to do the same thing for week 2. All right, so week 2. And some folks choose to organize by thematic groupings or other kinds of clusters or modules. You can really do it any which way. So I'm going to say add. Now I've accidentally added week 2 down here below resources. So it's really easy to sort of drag it using this sort of dragging, I'm going to call it a waffle, and have it in the order that it occurs, that I want it to occur. Now I can take this item that the library has added to the list for me. If I click on it, I can see information, I can see the full details of it. So I can see that it is available electronically online. I can also see that there's a physical item as well that the students can access in the library. When I go to item actions, what I can do is I can apply a very specific due date to this item, so date by which I want my students to read it by. So let's say I'm going to say Wednesday the 25th. I can make a note for the students, what I want them to particularly pay attention to, etc. I can also hide it from them, right? So perfect. So I've done that. If this was a print-only book, I could click on the Request Digitization button to request that the library digitize a chapter of this book, and then they will just plunk it in my list with a link, and my students will be able to access it online instead of having to go to the library in person. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this up, and I'm going to just simply drag it over to week 2, because I want them to read it in week 2. In terms of week 1, I want to add an article to it. So I'm going to say add. Now you can add sections and notes. You can also add individual items to your list. So you can do that a number of ways. Search the library, upload files that are on your computer. Some folks choose to add a bunch of resources to a list and add them just simply to a kind of a favorites list, so we can add them from favorites. Some folks like to use a DOI or an ISBN for an item, import references, and there's also manual entry. But we're going to say search the library, and I'm going to look for my very favorite article by Michael Buckland. So this is searching the library's catalog, online items only. I could opt to say include records without full text if I want print books, for example. But here's my article. I'm going to say add item to the list, and I want to add it to week 1 because that is when I want my students to read it. I can also say add and edit and go in and apply a due date and a note, but in this case I'm just going to say add, right? So these are 2 ways that I can organize or I can add information for my students. I can also do a manual entry. So for example, if there was a website that I particularly wanted them to have a look at, and I would call it Reading List Tool, it's just for the sake of example. This is more ideal for, say, I want my students to read a report on one of the United Nations web pages, or I want students to examine some policy on a website or information that exists on a website. So for item details, I can enter as little or as much as I want, but I am going to use, for the sake of example, the reading list tool page from the library's website, input some information for my students, and I'm going to hit next, and I'm going to add it. And I can add instruction to my students there, and I'm adding it in week 1. So there we go, reading list tool, right? The other thing that I can do with any of these items is that I can use the share item. I can copy a shareable link to any individual item in my list rather than, for example, the full list. And I can embed that in any part of my D2L page, in a module, in a section, even in an assignment. Or an assessment. So I can put a link to just a single item. Or what I've also done is I've created a reading list module, and in there I have linked to the entire reading list. So by going to existing activities, external learning tools, and then selecting reading list, right? And then it'll just add that as a module, and this is a direct link into the entire reading list that the students see. And they'll be able to sort by weeks, and they'll be able to access the various material. And that is a demonstration of how you add or organize materials in your reading list and make them visible to your students.